some of the comments that I recall hearing male executives say earlier in my career. Things like a woman saying that she was going to go on maternity leave and someone saying, well, her career is over. Like, you won't hear that now. I mean, maybe some people still think it, but at least everybody knows better than to say it. And so I do think it's definitely gotten better. But I do think there is still not enough females in senior roles. And I do think, that's a cycle. Like, you have to see it, and then you want to be it, and then sort of you move up over time.
Interesting. Okay, so now reflect back for a second. Your early careers. What are observations that you made? Like, did you not see women in certain roles? Like, talk to me about that.
No, I mean, yes, there were not very many females in roles at my early companies I worked at. And it was in the ones that were there, it was where it's like they were the primary female in a boys club, and they were having to sort of assimilate versus really be able to be themselves.
Now, okay, what advice would you offer to some females that do find themselves in primarily male-dominated organizations? Welcome to the She's So Sweet podcast, where we interview accomplished women who have worked their way to the C-suite. I'm your host, Kristin Falteruso, Chief Customer Officer and award-winning customer success executive. I am so thrilled to introduce our guest today, Kristin Dorsett, who is the Chief Product Officer at Viator. Hi, Kristin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Kristin. Thanks for having me.
And I know I pronounced that wrong. It's Viator. So I have to correct myself. I had it here. We talked about it and I got it wrong. But I promised myself I would correct it if I did, and I did, and I had to. So welcome to the show, Kristin.
Thank you.
So before we get into all of the great stuff that we've got teed up for today's conversation, I really would love to start by just sharing with our listeners a little bit about yourself. So let's start by talking about your current role, the company, what it does, and let's kind of set the stage for everyone today.
Sure. So I am Chief Product Officer at Viator. So you can say it properly by saying "do more with Viator." That's how we make you remember. And we are a marketplace for travel experiences. And so we're a multi-sided marketplace with tour and activity operators on one side and travelers on the other. And then we also have a big B2B business where we actually distribute our inventory to lots of partners around the travel industry. And as Chief Product Officer, I look after product management, design, and data teams. So basically anything related to what are we building in our products for customers is what my team looks after. And I am also temporarily, sorry to cut you off. Sorry, I'm temporarily looking after engineering as well, because we have a vacancy in our CTO position.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I was going to ask you, tell me a little bit about your team. Like, how big is it? Where are they based? Do you have remote teams? Are you guys in office? What does that comprise of?
So R&D overall, and that's what we call the combined, my organization, which is product design and data and engineering, we're about over 300 people worldwide. And most of our team is actually in Europe. So I'm a bit of an anomaly sitting in Austin, Texas, working remotely. Most of my team is based in Europe and primarily in the UK and Portugal right now, though we are growing our presence in Poland as well. And I would say we're about 50% remote, 50% in offices.
Okay. What challenges does that present for you? So being remote, again, with a global team like that, is that difficult for you to manage that?
During COVID, we all had to learn how to do it. And I think have really done well. I sit on Zoom calls all day long, and we figured out how to do collaboration and build relationships and a lot virtually, which is definitely a skill that I wasn't as good at before. And now I have to be.
Yeah, I don't think none of us were, right? I think I had an episode with someone when we recorded and we're like, you can't always be a leader who's prepared to do everything. And we don't always know everything. And like going into the pandemic, so many of us had to like relearn and develop new skills, right? Just like figure things out. We didn't have those experiences already. So I think you raise a valid point, right? We've all had to make those adjustments. So, I want to dig in here a little bit. So I want to get into your story. You've got a phenomenal one here. Now, I always talk to my guests about what they wanted to be when they grew up, because everyone's got a story there. And I haven't found anybody yet who was like, I wanted to be chief whatever. So when you were younger, what did you want to be?
I always wanted to be a writer. I wrote poetry, I wrote short stories. I really just loved anything creative. And I continued that all the way up through high school, even into college. I mean, I had two majors. One was practical, one less practical. And so my practical major was public relations and marketing. And so that was, okay, I'm going to be employable. I'm going to get some skills. And then my second was literature, and specifically rhetoric and composition. So the writing side of literature. And so I probably wrote, I don't know, 80,000 words in college, writing different projects I worked on.
Wow. Okay, so you're going to have to tell me, how did we get to where we are then? Because you don't even have necessarily a traditional, what does traditional mean anymore? But you don't even have a traditional kind of education leading you to where you are. I was a PR major. I don't think I would be a chief product officer. So tell me about this journey. How'd you go from writing to chief product officer?
So I started working in PR. My first couple of jobs in my career were PR jobs, and then expanded to a bit broader marketing jobs. And then at my first kind of big company I worked at was called HomeAway, which is now Vrbo, owned by Expedia. And I was hired as a PR assistant. That was my first job. And then started doing broader marketing things. And then I ended up getting some sales teams put under me as well. And so I was running some sales teams. And then I found my sales teams couldn't sell the product we had. And again, HomeAway was a marketplace for vacation rentals. And so we were selling primarily to individual homeowners as well as property managers. And my sales teams particularly were trying to sell a product built for individual homeowners to property managers. And it wasn't really working. The tools weren't meant for them. And so I was really annoying and kept saying, hey, the tools aren't good enough. The tools aren't good enough. And eventually they said, okay, here's a team, go build what you need. And that's how I became a product manager. And I really, really loved it. I mean, that's how my brain works. I'm very much a systems thinker. And so thinking about how all these things fit together, how the ecosystem fits together, that just really ended up being something that was kind of my sweet spot of what my superpower that I didn't even know I had before until I got into the role.
I love that. So wait, did you go straight into a chief product officer role, or were there like product manager roles? Tell me a little bit about so I want to get into like the product journey. So now obviously you've dovetailed, you get into product. What did that pivot look like for you?
Sure. So at HomeAway, I was a product manager working on tools for property managers. But I saw when looking at the C-suite of HomeAway and the more senior people, everybody had an MBA. And I didn't want that to be something that was sort of held against me. And so I decided to go to business school just to check the box.
Okay.
And so I did. I took a year off. I left HomeAway. I took a year off. I went to business school in the UK. And I really thought that I wanted to start a company. Like that was like in my head. I really wanted to start my own company. And so I actually ended up joining an early stage startup that was happening in London. And did that for a little bit, doing product as well as marketing, as well as business development, wearing lots of different hats. Ultimately, that didn't work out. Maybe we can talk more about that in a minute. And then I was looking for, okay, what do I want to do now? And so I was a product manager at another company called BookBub in Boston. So I moved from the UK back to the US and worked for this company, BookBub, amazing company in Boston. But I hated Boston winters and I wanted to live somewhere with sunshine. So I actually ended up moving to Las Vegas because my husband's family was there. And I was looking for product jobs in Las Vegas, and there was just nothing interesting. It was a lot of working for casinos, programming slot machines, like kind of that kind of thing. And then a recruiter from TripAdvisor reached out for me and was like, hey, I know that you're more of a product person, but I have this support job, this call center job. Would you be interested? And it was a big team. It was a director title. I was like, sure, I'll talk to you and give it a try. And so that was how I got into Viator. It was a TripAdvisor company, but Viator is a subsidiary of TripAdvisor. And I started out running the B2B side of a call center. And it was about 30 agents. And it was a different world for me. I mean, I'd run sales teams, but never support teams before. And as you know, support teams are a different world.
Oh, for sure. Now, okay, so you've had like 10 different careers, it sounds like, as you kind of just keep jumping to solve the different problems for the companies that want to bring you in. I got to go back for a second because I have this personal stigma that I don't have an MBA. I didn't get a master's degree, but I also have found myself in organizations where I'm like, oh, everybody has this thing and I don't have this thing. I got to ask you first on the MBA thing, has that significantly changed things for you and opportunities that you've had?
I can't say specifically. I mean, I didn't get a job from an MBA feeder program or anything. Yep. So I can't say I got a job because of it. But I think having an MBA and I went to Cambridge and having the Cambridge brand on my resume doesn't hurt.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, that year off, and I call it a year off. I mean, I was doing school, but it was more, I think of it as a year off because I was given a chance to really reflect on what do I like to do? What am I interested in? What are the problems I want to solve? And so I think for me, having that year was really, really important because it did let me, it clarified, okay, I like technology. I like entrepreneurship. I want high growth companies. I want to be building things. And so it just, for me, helped clarify what was most important to me.
That's so interesting. Okay, so now you get to Viator. Now you've had marketing and PR jobs. You've had some product roles, right? You've managed sales. Now you got this support organization. How did you then decide, okay, of all of these things, this is where did you find your passion now at that stage in your journey? Because all of those roles are so significantly different.
I think the commonality of all the roles is having really hairy problems to solve. So when I came into the support organization at Viator, there was Viator multi-sided marketplace. One side of the market is tour operators who list their products, which are tours and activities, on our platform, and then we publish them and travelers can book them. We had a backlog of about 30,000 products that needed to be manually reviewed by humans. And I had a team of 30 people. So just at the pace that we could actually manually review them would have been years. I can't even remember the estimate, but 4 years probably. And so this was a puzzle. It's how do we solve this? And it wasn't, the option of hiring 3,000 humans wasn't on the table. So it ended up actually having to be a software solution. And so I had to very quickly work within Viator of okay, what are we going to do to take some humans out of some of these processes to be able to publish these listings? And we did that over the first couple of years I was there. We went from, about 30,000 products live on the site to at one point over 400,000 products.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we've identified that the commonality here is you're a problem solver. Okay. I love that. So now we're going to kind of take that full circle because I want to understand some of the pivotal moments. Now, obviously, you've already talked about all of these career transitions that you've made, but now thinking back over to your ascent to the C-suite where you are now, what were some of those pivotal moments? What were the big decisions that you made throughout your career that you feel really contributed to this success that you've had so far?
Sure. I think, one of the big decisions I made was moving into product management when I was at HomeAway. So I was in a, kind of business development type group that was becoming more specialized over time. And I was running mainly sales operations. And so I had a path of I could move up and become sort of director of sales operations. But for me, that was too much of a specialty. And it was something I'd been doing the last few years. It wasn't, I'd solved all the hairy problems that I was interested in solving. And then there was actually another role within HomeAway that was more of a marketing director role. And I was okay, well, that's I've done marketing. I feel it was a pretty well-run team and it was just sort of more optimization. I was I don't think that's really for me either because it's there aren't big enough problems. And then the product side, it was okay, well, I know what problems we want to go solve here. And so for me, it was actually a linear move. Either of the other two moves would have been a better title. Okay. And then for me, this was from a title perspective, a linear move, but it was a new problems to solve, new skills to develop. And so for me, that was it was finding my pocket of what I'm actually really good at. I was good at operations, but I feel product and figuring out how an ecosystem needs to fit together is really what I'm good at.
Okay. So I got to dig into this a minute because we know that so many folks think about their career trajectory as this, just upward, got to chase a title, got to chase compensation. It's pre-designed for you by your organization, by your leader. Now, you just made a point here where you said, I could have taken these other 2 roles. And like, yes, from a title standpoint, it would have been a promotion. You decided to take this lateral move. What were the driving factors behind that? And then how do you think that contributed to some of the continued success you've had?
The main driving factor was that I always, like, my ultimate goal is to run my own company, to be CEO of a software company of some kind. And knowing that in tech, understanding the product side is really, really important. Knowing that's a set of skills that I didn't have as strong of and that I wanted to develop. And so I was thinking, 4 steps ahead of, okay, I know where I want to get to. And I had a manager who was an amazing mentor for me, helping me think through these trade-offs. And he was the one that encouraged me to actually take the product role. And I definitely don't regret it. It was the right decision for me. And but either other path might have been fine. And this is where I think there's no real right choice. And I think for me, I would have kept navigating to the hairy problems in whatever business I was in.
Okay. So now if you have to offer advice, because I think we need to stay on this for a minute, because I talk to folks all the time, and I'm sure you see this all the time. People pre-map out their entire career journey, right? Like, I'm going to be a manager, then I'm going to be a director, then I'll be a senior director, a VP, SVP, right? Get to the C-suite. They have, like, and not everyone thinks this way, right? But folks that are highly ambitious and have these aspirations of being in executive leadership roles, they predefine, right? And they kind of map this out. What advice would you offer to folks who are kind of stuck in that rigid mindset of like, no, I have to do this and this would be a setback, or I don't want to take a lesser title, or I don't want to do something, what advice would you offer? Like, you're talking to somebody who's got this all, they've got their whole life mapped out, which we know how that goes. What advice are you offering them?
I think that it's more important to have skills and wins under your belt than having that next title. Because the next title may not always be exactly what you thought it was going to be anyway. And maybe the market's changing and the types of companies you work at will change. I've worked at sort of mainly scale up type companies, and it's like there's new roles being created all the time. And so you don't know what your next title is going to be because it may be a role that didn't exist before. Now, if you're in a bigger, more like company where it is like every 2 years, you're going to get a title, like in the military, then it's a very different path. But I think for me, and especially I like dynamic, fast growing companies, it's not going to be linear. I talk to this with my team all the time of I'm creating new roles all the time as opportunities pop up. And right now in tech with AI, there's going to be titles that didn't even exist 5 years ago. And so it's just having skills and adaptability. That's the most important thing.
I love that. I think it's so important. And the reason why I want to spend so much time there is because I need folks to just get out of this mindset of prescriptive career paths, because I, like yourself, didn't have a very traditional linear path up, and we made pivots. And so going back to these pivotal moments for you. So you talked about making the decision to move into product as one of them. What were some of those other pivotal moments in your career path so far?
I think, taking the role at Viator and running the support organization was the other one, because for product leaders, I think there's no better way to understand your product and the problems with it than being in a support organization.
Right.
I know all the problems on both sides of the marketplace because I lived. I had suppliers yelling at me when I took escalation calls. So it's and you feel it acutely. Whereas sometimes I think a lot of product leaders, if you're not that close to the customer, you just don't feel the pain. And so I really do think, I am where I am at Viator because of that, where I started, because I do understand the customer so well and the problems so well.
Okay. So as a customer leader, this is like music to my ears. I love that. Now, obviously that is not a traditional path for a lot of folks that do work in product. How would you kind of advise, or what advice would you offer to folks that are in product that don't have the opportunity to lead a support team, but how can they still learn and grow from understanding their customers? Or maybe how do you bring the customer into your organization?
I think it's talking to customers. And I would say even my product managers don't do this as much as I think they should be. Because hearing them in your ear and starting to build that persona in your head when you're trying to solve problems, nothing's more valuable than that. And often bigger product organizations, there's a research layer between you and the customer. And that's fine. They're very valuable and do good research. but there's something about having that customer in your ear that makes you even better and even more tuned to what the pains are.
Again, music to my ears. I don't think that there's enough folks cross-functionally that spend time with customers. So I love that you really have brought the voice of the customer into your entire mindset and then into your organization. So I think that that's amazing. Good for you. Okay, now we're going to pivot a little bit because I have to reflect and we got to talk about challenges because again, nobody gets anywhere in life, especially in your career professionally, without navigating challenges. And we know that. So I want to talk about some of the obstacles you've had to overcome professionally. So thinking back your years of experience, what are some of those significant challenges or obstacles that you faced? And talk to me about how you had to overcome them.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest challenges I've had is finding the right culture fits for me. And because there's certain, and I think this is so important. I actually heard one of your other guests talking about this as well. Because I think why I've done well at Viator is because me and the culture vibrate on the same frequency. And it just makes everything easier. And so I've had a couple times in my career where I've joined companies that I wasn't vibrating at the same frequency. And it was a mismatch. And a couple of, I left pretty quickly. And so I would say that is something I don't regret those decisions. I don't waste your time at a company that's not going to be a fit. But it is where, you put a lot of emotional investment and they put an investment in you too. And it's not great for anybody if you end up joining something that doesn't work out. And so I do think that's one of my biggest kind of regrets in my career is not having those red flags up front and still joining and then it not being a fit. So now, I'm going to be very, very picky about whatever I would do next because the culture is one of the most important things.
Okay, so now I'm going to dig into this. How are you personally, for Kristin, how are you defining what a good culture is for you? And what are some of the things that you're evaluating? Do you have a top 3 that's if a company and a CEO have these 3 things, I'm in?
I think there has to be customer centricity. You have to be solving real problems and not just financially motivated. Now, we all want to make money, but if you're not solving something for the customer, I just don't think it's going to be a sustainable business. And it's just not going to be very fun for me. There has to be some element of risk tolerance and don't have to be crazy risks, but ability to sort of take a leap. And again, solve a problem for a customer in an unexpected way. And so but using data to inform some of your decisions that you're making. So there has to be data literacy, sort of an evidence-driven culture, but willing to take that extra leap if maybe you don't have the perfect pile of evidence that it's the right thing to do. But test fast, learn, and then move on. That is part of the Viator culture. We strive for better, not perfect. And it is where we're trying to just increase our velocity to market. Because sometimes you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work until you put it in customers' hands. And then on the third thing for culture, and I may have already done 3, but maybe I'll do a 4th, is just nice people. I have no time for jerks. It's not worth it. So nice, smart people that want to solve problems for customers.
I love it. Now I want to pick on something else that you said. You talked about making these pivots fast. So there are a lot of folks that believe that they need to stay in a company for a year to check some artificial box. Now, you made a point here, right? If you're not in a company, culture, and environment where you're thriving, where you're going to be able to perform at your best, do you think that there is an advantage or disadvantage to sticking around too long? And how do you know, or what were the things that you evaluated that said, Kristin, now you got to go. Today's the day, we've got to make a change.
It was just in my gut. It's hard. I can't point to specific evidence. I just knew it. And I knew it in a couple of weeks that I was just I'm not going to thrive here.
And so did you leave in a couple of weeks? Do you have a role that you were
I didn't.
Okay.
No, it was a couple, there was 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
But I knew in a couple of weeks.
I've had similar experiences. And so it's there is a little bit of that guilt though, should I stick it out, right? Like, and I feel like we end up debating ourselves a bit, like, no, like maybe I need to give it a little bit more time. Maybe things will get better. But at the end of the day, it's so funny because you made that realization early and the outcome obviously was in line with that, despite how long you gave it in between. And so I think that folks need to spend a little bit of time really assessing that, because I feel like this arbitrary idea of like, stay for a year, stay for 2 years, don't leave early, give it a chance, sometimes does a big disservice to us professionally.
And early in your career, 2 years is an eternity. And if you're not learning, because to me, it's all about velocity of your learning. And if you're not learning, it's a waste of 2 years.
The She's So Sweet podcast is brought to you by Client Success. Client Success is an all-in-one customer success platform to help post-sale implementation and success teams manage customers from new to renew. Through an industry-leading platform approach, Client Success gives businesses an in-depth view into customer health, product usage trends, along with churn and risk data so that your team can not only retain customers, but help them grow as well. Whether it's managing customer onboarding workflows in shared portals, building custom health scores, tracking sentiment with NPS surveys, or doing more with less through AI and automations, Client Success gives customer success professionals a true one-stop platform to manage all aspects of the customer journey. To learn more about the industry's fastest to implement customer success platform, visit www.clientsuccess.com. That's Client Success. Simple, powerful customer success. Okay, let's go back to other challenges or obstacles that you had to overcome. So we talked about one. Was there any other things that you're like, yes, this was something else really difficult, challenging I had to navigate?
I think like everybody, navigating COVID, going totally remote. Viator, we closed some offices. We did some layoffs that year. And it was constantly navigating just sort of dark times. And it definitely, in a lot of ways, it made me more upbeat as a leader, because you have to be, because you're the one setting the tone for everybody. And if I'm out there optimistic of like, yeah, this year's been rough, but the future is bright, and saying it over and over and meaning it, that matters. And I was promoted several times in this period, and my visibility in the company was more and more. And so it became more and more important for me to be the one setting that tone.
Okay, so now I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because I hear a lot of folks that are like, yes, but there's also this balance between being optimistic and being vulnerable and authentic, right? We navigated some really tough times. Obviously, you're coming off layoffs. I know as a leader, you're an empathetic person. You're going to have tough feelings about having to let people go, especially in a time like that. So where do you strike that balance of like, yes, I have to be optimistic because it's important for culture and I need to lead from the front, versus, oh crap, this is scary for me and I'm sad and I have real emotion here. So like, how do you think about that balance of authenticity and like company culture impact as a leader?
I think it is a balance. And I do say, like, I'm very direct and transparent. And so people almost always know exactly what's on my mind, even if I don't want them to. So it is, I do think I lead with authenticity. And it was, all of us, all of a sudden going from dressing nice and going into an office to wearing sweatpants every day. I think it made everything less formal. And I think it did really, and I spent a lot of time, doing one-on-ones with all of my team and trying to keep those personal connections. And I think that's important. And I think those personal one-to-one connections is really where the authenticity is. Obviously it's a big group talks. I want to do it too, but I think it's that personal connection is really where it matters.
I think that's a great point, right? Because there is a different conversation in different settings, right? Like what you're saying to the masses versus being a bit more vulnerable in an intimate setting. So I think that's a great way to articulate how you bring kind of both of those to the forefront. Now, as much as I love talking about obstacles, what I really want to talk about is your successes, because as women, I feel like we don't spend enough time celebrating all of the success that we've had in our careers professionally. So as you think back several years, right? What were some of those big successes that you think back, you're like, wow, these are really proud moments or things that I've accomplished that I'm like so proud of that I want to share and talk about?
Sure. So I think for me, it's all about building things. And so the things I'm most proud about is, and that's teams, products, processes. And so it's when I look back and I think like, wow, like having 30,000 products on Viator to over 400,000. I mean, obviously this was a huge team effort. This wasn't just me, but like I had a hand in it. And like, that is a huge feat to do in a few years. And actually at HomeAway, I had a similar story of where we were building the property manager business. And we went from something like 2 million a year in revenue to almost 30 million a year over a few years. And it's seeing that growth is just really, really exciting. So building businesses is definitely what I am most proud of. But I'm also proud of the people I've hired, the people I've helped develop. I mean, a lot of my team at HomeAway are now VPs and C-suite in other companies. And it's really, I mean, again, I had a small part of that. They were just very, very talented. But just seeing that, okay, all these people whose lives I touched are now doing great things. Like, that's really, really rewarding as well.
It's so interesting. This seems to be a very common theme in the leaders that we interview here for the show, is that everyone talks about the impact they've made on people's lives. And it's almost like, even when I'm asking, what are your successes, right? Like, what are the things you're most proud of? It's so evident that the best leaders out there are the ones that care so deeply about the people that they impact. And so I love that you did articulate that. It is a common theme. And I do really think that there's a direct correlation between great leaders and that strong desire to want to see other people win. And I love to see that in women, especially because I feel like sometimes we have this like negative connotation that like women are trying to hold other women back. And I don't see it in the leaders that I've been able to highlight here. And so I just love that is something you're proud of.
Yeah, I definitely, I would say I don't see that either of women holding it. I mean, I think all the women, I mean, I'm very fortunate at Viator that 50% of our exec team is women.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And it is, and unusual. But I think because of that, we have a very, very like good culture for women in our company. And a great value proposition because we're remote, very flexible. I think it's a great value proposition for women who want to work in tech and want that speed and scale, but maybe don't want the very rigid experience of having to go into an office every day. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I love how female centric our teams are.
That's really great. I'm jealous of that because I wish I had more of that. But I think it's amazing that that's the culture that you guys have. And I'm sure that it draws a lot of women in. Now, let me ask you, because of that, do you see that there is a difference in the pipeline as you see candidates who want to work at the company? Do you see a higher percentage of females, higher than you might otherwise at other companies?
I was just looking at this data this week, and in certain pockets, yes. But not overall where I want it to be. And especially I'm looking after engineering right now, and our female engineer pipeline is just not where we need it to be. And so we're kind of mobilizing on what we're going to do about it. I mean, it's a tricky one, but it's one that I think we, again, have a good value proposition. And so it's how do we make sure that it's out there in our job descriptions, that I'm out there talking about it on things like this.
Okay, so this is interesting because we did have another chief product officer on a couple episodes back, and we did talk about this because despite your intentions to want to hire women into these roles, there just isn't a lot of women who are coming up into this, right? So it's not like we're choosing 100 men over 100 women. It's like we've got a pool of 100 men and 2 women because we just don't have enough people who have kind of come up in this path. How do you think about that? Like, what are some of the ways that as a leader in this function, right, you're over all of these types of roles, what can we do to help change that? Like, what do you think that we have to be thinking about differently here?
We're thinking about it, I mean, a lot at filling the pipeline at the more junior levels. So finding opportunities of, like we have a data rotation program that's for people who are maybe a bit of a early career, but maybe switching a little bit. And so we're using this as an opportunity of bringing very talented female analysts into our business that maybe wouldn't have come up a more traditional path. And we don't have a program like this for product right now, but we are talking about it. And I think it's similar. It's like, hey, what are those? How do we get women who are maybe in other functions right now, but have the right aptitude to be good in product? And how do we sort of bring them in at that more junior level and teach them how to do product the Viator way?
See, like, I don't think if there is enough of that being done where we're looking at the skills that folks have and like some of the traits, those innate traits that they have where they could be successful doing something else and giving them opportunities to try something new and actually see what's possible for them. So I really love that that's something that you're investing in because to your point, not everyone's going to come up in a traditional way. Your career has been a great example of that, right? Non-traditional path to a chief product officer. So I love that you guys are making that commitment. Now, as a C-level executive, this is something that every single guest here, we have debated this. I don't know that it's dead yet as a topic, but how are we balancing things personally and professionally? So you obviously have a home life. There's things that you have passions that are outside of being a chief product officer, but then you have this commitment and you're a senior leader in an organization with a big global team. How are you introducing balance for yourself to be personally and professionally successful?
It's definitely trickier. And I had a daughter 2.5 years ago, and it's been more challenging since I've had a kid. I would say I'm glad that I worked really hard earlier in my career and amassed a bunch of skills because I don't have time to amass as many skills now.
That is fair.
And I travel a fair amount for my job. And so it is where I have to very much be intentional with my time, both professionally and personally. And so my calendar, I've managed to the 15-minute mark every day. Like I put in like, wait, this is bedtime and bath time. It's in my calendar. And I try not to let work encroach on it. Like that is time with my family. And then I have blocks of like, okay, well, every day I only have about 5 hours a day to work with my European teams. So from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. every day, that is time for my European teams. And sort of without fail, like my time blocks are fairly protected. But I would say I don't have time for hobbies really anymore. Like my hobby is hanging out with my kid. I mean, you have to give something up. And for me, it has been hobbies.
Okay, that's fair. So let's talk about those sacrifices for a little bit. What are some sacrifices that you think as you've grown your career that you've had to make along the way? Because I don't think that we spend enough time talking about that, right? I think that there's this idea that we can do it all and there needs to be this balance. And it's like, you can do it in a 9 to 5. And we just know that that's not reality. So what were some of the sacrifices that you had to make to commit to your career to get to where you are?
I think since my daughter's been born, it's really my downtime. I just don't have really any downtime to myself. And so so things like watching TV shows or going to the movies, like I just don't do that anymore. And I used to, love watching TV. And now it's like, I just don't have time. So like you can ask me about any show that's come out in the last 3 years. I don't know. I almost certainly haven't watched it. So that definitely had to cut down on my downtime. And exercise, I've had to basically put it in my calendar and be very, very like quick about it. Like there's no going to the gym for a leisurely 2-hour workout anymore. It's like, no, I have 45 minutes on my calendar. Like I need to get it done, shower, and get back to work.
So you're doing a lot of at-home workouts then?
I do. Or running outside is what I do the most.
Running. Okay. Well, I love that. And I think it's important that we spend some time talking about that because I think everyone wants to believe that it can be rosier than it actually is. And there's tough aspects about having the career ambition to want to get to a certain level. And I think we need to be honest and open about that. Okay. So now let's take a step back. Looking back for you personally, was there a piece of advice that you wish you had received earlier? Like some kind of insight or something that you're like, if I knew this when I was younger, this would have significantly changed things for me. What's that thing?
I think the biggest thing, and again, one of your guests recently said it was everyone has imposter syndrome. Like, and no one at the table thinks they belong at the table. And everyone sort of always thinks everyone else is more talented or smarter or more experienced than they are. And getting to the C-level, I was thinking like, well, I have it all figured out. I don't. Like nobody does. And that is what I've learned is that you don't, no one has it figured out. Like everyone's making it up as they go.
I think that's important. And I don't know that there is anybody professionally who hasn't struggled with that at one point or another. And even having that realization that, everybody else feels that, I still don't think it necessarily changes how we feel. We still struggle with it to some extent, which is wild to me. Because I'm like, if I just knew that everyone else was the same, why am I still feeling like this? So I think that there is this conversation that needs to be had that like, this is a normal feeling and it's okay. And to your point, right? Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all figuring it out as we go. Nobody has all the answers and no one's ever experienced all of these things before, right? Maybe pockets of things, but we just went through a pandemic. No one experienced that before, right? We're navigating things for the first time. You talked about AI, right? We haven't had AI before. That wasn't something we had to consider. So I love that you talked about that because I think it's something real that we all have to just consider and be okay with.
Certainly.
Okay. Now, I know that we're winding down to the end here. And one of the things that I think, especially in your role, because it's so important for me to hear your take on this, how do you see the landscape for female executives evolving, especially in tech?
I think it's definitely gotten better over my career. I mean, I was thinking back ahead of this conversation of just as some of the comments that I recall hearing male executives say earlier in my career. Things like a woman saying that she was going to go on maternity leave and someone saying, well, her career is over. Like, you won't hear that now. I mean, maybe some people still think it, but at least everybody knows better than to say it. And I think it's a big improvement. And I think my company, especially being global, things like maternity leave are just normalized. Like, it's not even a thing. It's like, yep, someone in Europe is going to have a baby. They're going to probably be gone for 8 to 12 months. No big deal. And so I do think it's definitely gotten better. But I do think there is still not enough females in senior roles. And I do think, that's a cycle. Like, you have to see it, and then you want to be it, and then sort of you move up over time. And so it'll get better, but it's really slow. Like, it's moving a lot more slowly than I think it should be.
Interesting. Okay, so now reflect back for a second. Your early careers. What were, outside of some of the comments, what are observations that you made? Like, did you not see women in certain roles? Like, talk to me about that.
No, I mean, yes, there were not very many females in roles at my early companies I worked at. And it was the ones that were there, it was where it's like they were the primary female in a boys club, and they were having to sort of assimilate versus really be able to be themselves. And so I do think, again, like, I'm very, very lucky at Viator. Like, we are like half female. So there's no boys club vibe whatsoever.
Now, okay, now we know that there are still companies that are primarily men and definitely different pockets of different organizations. What advice would you offer to some females that do find themselves in primarily male-dominated organizations or companies? And what are things that they should consider? How should they, like, what advice can we offer to them to help them be their most authentic self and control their destiny, right? To be successful?
I think you should be your authentic self. And then if it's not a fit, don't stay. I mean, again, this is my own bias, but you're not going to be able to change a company culture as one person. I mean, maybe you can find a coalition. I mean, make relationships with other females and start to build a bit of a coalition. But I mean, culture change is one of the hardest things. And as one individual, it's tough. So I think it's finding the culture that's actually a better fit for you.
I think it's great advice. Okay. So now, before we wrap up today, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away with them, right? We've hit on so many things. You gave so much great advice here, and hearing your story is remarkable. What are we leaving with everyone today? What's that one thing?
I think the biggest thing for women, especially early in their career, is just raising your hand. There's so many problems to solve in any organization. And the people who spot those problems and propose solutions are often the people who get to get more scope. I mean, maybe sometimes it'll be on top of what you were already doing. But again, you get those wins under your belt, and then people see those. And then that gives you more and more opportunities for other people to pluck you and put you in charge of other big problems to solve. And so, but it starts by seeing these problems, proposing a solution, or raising your hand of how can I help? I had someone the other day who came to me and was like, I have a bit of free time. What problem can I help you with? And that was amazing. I mean, I have dozens of problems I could use help with. And so this is an opportunity for me to work closely with a female in my org that maybe I wouldn't have as much otherwise.
I think that's great advice. I definitely took a similar path in my own professional journey. Now, I want to dig deeper on this for just a minute. Now, we know that over the past year or so, we've seen a lot of organizations make a lot of RIFs, right? Reduces in force. They've had to cut back on staff, which left a lot of employees that were still in these roles feeling very overwhelmed and stretched very thin. How can we recommend someone to raise their hand and do something and be more proactive when they are feeling like they are so overwhelmed with their current workload and what they're responsible for? How can we help them figure out how to still lean into this while navigating their current challenges in their environment?
I think that's a very fair point and a very sticky situation to be in. I think first starting with their current workload, I think it's the job of their manager to help them prioritize. So it's making sure that what they're working on, the most important things and the things that are going to have the most impact. I mean, sort of the Pareto principle. I mean, about 20% of the work you do is going to have 80% of the impact. So and if you're not sure what that 20% is, that's your manager's job to help you do this. And so that's one, just making sure you're working on the most important things, period. And then it's also, there is an opportunity in that conversation to say, and actually, am I working on the most important things overall for our team? Or is there actually something else that I could help you with that maybe isn't on my plate now? But let's definitely take the less important stuff on my plate off. And that is where, I mean, definitely like early in your career, you may not feel comfortable saying I'm overwhelmed, but you have to. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to work on the most important things. And just saying, hey, I think this stuff is maybe less important. What if we didn't do it for a quarter? What would happen? And usually your manager is going to be amenable to that.
Kristin, I think that is phenomenal advice. And it's something like I had to ask, I had to reframe the question there because I know even with my team, right, I'm very delicate about their current bandwidth. And I know that I would love to see them raise their hands more, but I think it's great advice, right? Like, let's deprioritize things that aren't driving real meaningful impact. Let's stop doing work for the sake of doing work and really try to drive our businesses forward. So I love that advice. Your entire journey here is so impressive and so inspiring. I just want to thank you so much for your time today. I'm super excited to see what the future holds for you. So thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on our show today.
Thanks, Kristy. Enjoyed our conversation.
Great. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, connect with me on LinkedIn, and thanks again. We'll see you real soon. Hi guys, I want to share a bit about an organization that I support called Wednesday Women. They're on a mission to increase the visibility of executive women leaders that you should know, learn from, and be inspired by. On LinkedIn, they share the profile of 2 amazing women each week, on Wednesdays of course. And now just imagine if we all followed, amplified, and nominated the women that we want to see more of. Their initiative provides examples of women CEOs, founders, sales executives, technical leaders, and so many more. By supporting Wednesday Women, you'll see more of these professionals in your social feeds, of course, but also on stages, podcasts, and panels. If you're interested in learning more and supporting their initiative, head over to www.wednesdaywomen.org or follow them on LinkedIn.